as the president decides he will not punish Saudi Arabia. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith, live inside America's Newsroom. Warm up the coffee.
That's right. Good morning to you. And good morning. I'm John Scott in for Bill Hemmer. The new developments come as several top Republicans slam President Trump's refusal to further punish Saudi Arabia for the killing of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, insisting that it's unclear whether the kingdom's ruling crown prince is responsible. The president also says he's putting America first by maintaining a strong relationship.
All I do is focus on this country and making great deals for this country. I don't focus on making great deals for myself because I don't care anymore. So Saudi Arabia has nothing to do with me. What does have to do with me is putting America first. I'm not going to destroy the world economy, and I'm not going to destroy the economy for our country by being foolish with Saudi Arabia.
White House correspondent Kevin Corke is live from West Palm Beach, Florida this morning, where the first family will spend their Thanksgiving holiday. Good morning, Kevin.
Morning. Great to be with you. You know, very interesting. I just want to say this. A lot of people, Sandra, were asking the question, why not? What's the thinking behind this idea of not further punishing the Saudi kingdom for its alleged role, perhaps, in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi? Well, the White House, you heard, in fact, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo say just yesterday, quote, "It's a mean, nasty world out there." And so the thinking for the White House is, look, in that environment, you have to make some pretty tough choices. And in this case, it would appear they're making the choice, in fact, manifestly so, to stick with these Saudis. Let me take you to Twitter. A very interesting tweet as the president begins to very subtly, or perhaps not so subtly, show his support for the Saudi kingdom. He said this: oil prices getting lower. Great. Like a big tax cut for America and the world. Enjoy. $54 was just $82. Thank you to Saudi Arabia, but let's go lower. Now, the gas prices and oil movement comes amid the growing consensus that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman may have orchestrated Khashoggi's murder. Now, that's something he denies, and the president, despite analysis from the intel community, isn't ready to cast blame.
They didn't make a determination. And it's just like I said, I think it was maybe he did, maybe he didn't. They did not make that assessment. The CIA has looked at it. They've studied it a lot. They have nothing definitive. And the fact is, maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
But on Capitol Hill, there's been very strong disagreement over the administration's unwillingness to harshly criticize the Saudis. You may have read Bob Corker's tweet. He said, "I never thought I'd see the day a White House would moonlight as a public relations firm for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia." As you can well imagine, ruffling a bit of feathers on the Hill. Sandra?
To watch that developing story, Kevin, and the president has submitted these written answers now to special counsel Robert Mueller.
Yeah.
So where does the investigation go from here?
Well, quite honestly, they just want to see this thing wrap up because they feel like there has been no proof of Russian collusion. There will be no proof of Russian collusion. That certainly seems to be the attitude by the White House. So the real question, as you point out, is where do we go from here? I have a few options I can share for the folks at home. I think they'll find this somewhat instructive. Essentially, what you're looking at now is what will happen. Will the Mueller team answers? They could also review the answers, Sandra, and then simply prepare to disclose the report, which is what I think a lot of people think they will do. They could, however, compare the president's answers with other respondents, and that's where things can get a little thorny. And then ultimately the so-called nuclear option, that would be to subpoena the president himself. Now, the latter, as you can imagine, could create a constitutional crisis. The White House remaining steadfast in its insistence there was never any collusion with the Russians. In fact, Rudy Giuliani issued a statement about the questions submitted to the Mueller team. He said this: "It has been our position from the outset that much of what has been asked raised serious constitutional issues and was beyond the scope of a legitimate inquiry. This remains our position today." Very strong words there from Rudy Giuliani. Sandra?
Meanwhile, and finally, Kevin, there's a report this morning that the president wanted the Justice Department to prosecute Hillary Clinton and James Comey.
Yeah, we've heard him sort of say this off the cuff. It's very interesting, though, to read that Times piece and get a much stronger sense that, yeah, he feels like one or maybe both have broken the law, and therefore maybe the DOJ ought look into that possibility. But let me share this. The Times piece is careful to sort of elide past the observation that asking why something isn't happening or hasn't been pursued or even wanting it to happen, look, it's not the same as ordering someone to do it. Still, White House counsel thought that the president was using the weight of the DOJ to pursue his political enemies, and that is never a good idea, in particular in this case. That said, by the way, I should tell you this. It looks like a relatively tranquil day here in South Florida. We do know the president, wouldn't you, is out on the links this morning. And as we get details about that or anything else, we're here for you. But for now, back to you.
Kevin Court, quite clearly not from the White House this morning, from West Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you very much.
For more on all this, let's bring in Byron York, chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, also a Fox News contributor. Byron, good morning to you.
Good morning, John.
The CIA concluded pretty extensively, or pretty strongly, I guess you would say, that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, was behind the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, but the president does not seem inclined to agree.
CIA said it had a high degree of confidence in that conclusion, but President Trump has been remarkably frank and unfiltered about the reasons he has decided not to take any further action against Saudi Arabia. He has explained that the Saudis are a key ally. They're extremely important in the war on terror. They produce a lot of oil, and maybe even most importantly, they are a huge customer of the United States, not only in military hardware, but in other business areas, about $400 billion in all. So the president made it clear that he is not interested in further sanctions or punishment over the Khashoggi murder. Now, we should remember that just last week the administration announced that it is sanctioning 17 Saudis, including one who is close to the Crown Prince, for the Khashoggi murder. But a lot of pressure on the president to do more. And I think he made a pretty clear case that he is not interested.
Yeah, there are a lot of people on Capitol Hill, especially in the Senate, who disagree with the president's assessment. They would like to see Saudi Arabia punished. Do they have the wherewithal to make that happen?
You know, it's really interesting. We saw the chairman and the ranking member. You just heard from Bob Corker, the outgoing chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez, the newly reelected right now ranking member of it. They've written a letter to the president saying that he has to make a formal determination of who killed Khashoggi. And they say that Congress has that authority under the Magnitsky Act. But when that act was passed, President Obama at the time issued a signing statement and said that part of it was unconstitutional and that Congress could not make the president do that sort of thing. So I would expect President Trump would have a similar response about this Saudi issue.
Meantime, let's turn our attention to the Mueller investigation and the president's answers to the questions that have now been submitted. There were limitations on what the White House was willing to give to Mueller. Is that going to be enough for him?
Well, we don't know. I mean, the big question is whether this satisfies Mueller and he can go ahead and issue a final report, or whether it just opens up new avenues of investigation. On those limitations, you're right. Basically, the president and his legal team had said they were not going to answer questions about alleged obstruction, which, if it happened, would have happened in the White House and thus be covered by executive privilege. The questions they apparently did answer concern those issues of allegations of collusion, which happened during the campaign. Of course, the president was not the president at that time. But we don't know exactly what the president has answered. We don't know exactly what he has refused to answer. And we don't know if any of that is satisfactory to Robert Mueller right now.
Many more things to learn about all of this. Byron York.
Absolutely.
Byron, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Much more ahead on all of this. Andy McCarthy joining us with his take on all the big stories coming out of the White House later this hour. That'll happen about 20 minutes from now.
We look forward to that. Meanwhile, President Trump pushing back after a federal judge blocked his new asylum policy, saying he's ready to take the fight to crack down on illegal immigration all the way to the highest court.
Well, you go to the Ninth Circuit, and it's a disgrace, and I'm going to put in a major complaint because you cannot win, if you're us, a case in the Ninth Circuit. In my opinion, it's a disgrace what happens with the Ninth Circuit. We will win that case in the Supreme Court.
Casey Stiegel's live in Dallas with more on this. Casey, good morning.
Hey, Sandra, good morning to you. Yeah, even President Trump's Homeland Security Secretary weighing in on this. Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen calling it dangerous. And in fact, she made those comments while at the U.S.-Mexico border yesterday in California. And she referred to the situation as a crisis, saying her agency will continue to enforce the immigration laws of America. Listen.
If you try to enter our country without authorization, you have broken the law of the United States. You will be detained, prosecuted, and repatriated.
Secretary Nielsen also expressing concerns about the growing number of migrants from that caravan who are now creating makeshift camps and setting up shop on the Mexican side of the border in places like Tijuana and Mexicali, prepared to wait for months because of the backlog of asylum claims. This as the U.S. military continues beefing up its presence along the entire southern border. They were called in to assist U.S. Customs and Border Protection, as you know, and according to the U.S. Department of Defense, about 5,900 active troops are currently on the ground, adding that the estimated cost to, quote, deploy, operate, sustain, and redeploy forces is anticipated to cost approximately $72 million, and that only includes the Department of Defense's forces and support that has been requested and approved as of just this week. So quite costly operation down there, Sandra.
We'll keep watching all of it. Casey Stiegel, thank you.
And a Fox News alert, we are moments away after another tough day on Wall Street yesterday from the Dow ringing the opening bell. It lost more than 550 points yesterday. Facebook took another hit as its chief, Mark Zuckerberg, says he is not going anywhere anytime soon. Maria Bartiromo is on deck with reaction.
Plus, a new warning from the CDC just days before Thanksgiving. Throw away all that romaine lettuce in your fridge. We'll tell you why that may not even be enough.
And officials in California warning the situation could get worse as they prepare for heavy rains today.
Right now, we're just...
Consumers urged to throw away their romaine lettuce and not buy any more because it could be contaminated with a new strain of E. coli. 32 people have been infected with the bacteria in 11 states, including 13 who've been hospitalized. We'll have a live report about what's going on next hour.
Well, we are just minutes away now from the opening bell on Wall Street. After yesterday's big sell-off, the Dow plunged more than 550 points yesterday alone. The losses accelerating all the way into the final hour of trading, wiping out the gains for the year on both the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Maria Bartiromo is anchor of Mornings with Maria on the Fox Business Network and Sunday Morning Futures here on Fox News Channel. You're coming fresh off of 3 hours of anchoring on FBN this morning. Maria, what are people saying about the crazy movement that we're seeing in the U.S. stock market?
You know, I think this volatility that we've been seeing in the market is directly affected to worries over growth. You know, it's all about growth in the market, and we're worried about the economic story slowing down across the world as well as in the U.S. because basically the tax cut plan enabled a lot of growth, enabled companies to put more money to work because they were saving more money, and some people think that that runway is limited, that eventually the fiscal stimulus goes away. What do we have left? We've got monetary movements from the central bank raising interest rates, so you've got pressure raising interest rates on the markets. Remember, if you can get 3% in a 2-year note, or you can get 2.5% in a 10-year note.
That looks attractive.
It looks attractive. And so you might say, well, look, I've made money in the stock market. Let me shift some resources to fixed income because I can get 3%. But overall, Sandra, I'm not worried. I think the backdrop for the stock market is about earnings and about growth, and we still are talking about good growth. We may very well not sustain 4.2% growth that we saw in the second quarter of this year, or 3.5%, which was the third quarter GDP. But we're still talking about better than 3% growth, and we're still talking about a backdrop that people are feeling better. The economy is strong. Unemployment at a 50-year low. So I think right now we may very well see more volatility, but there will be some people who see this opportunity as a buying opportunity with this market down the way it is.
Seems like cautious optimism.
Exactly.
And the New York Times this morning talking about these technology giants, 5 tech giants, Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, Apple, and Netflix, since August, since the end of August, have lost $800 billion in market value. That's a big hit. And Facebook is under a lot of pressure. Mark Zuckerberg's under a lot of pressure. He gave a very rare interview yesterday, and he was asked about his future at the company. Listen.
People say, well, how did you not know this? And I think in some of these cases, it's a really big deal to come out and say that a nation state is behind something. And before our company puts a stamp on something saying that, I want to be really sure that that's the case.
So you are not stepping down as chairman?
That's not the plan.
What is the future of that company?
Well, you know what? At this point, I think the biggest failure of Facebook has been their failure to acknowledge that they're a media company, that they have real impact on billions of people across the world. I mean, when you've got 1 billion users on Facebook Messenger and 1 billion users on Instagram, and you've got all of these users, what is out in that content matters. And you can't have murders taking place live. You can't have commentary about the election and news that's actually fake news. So they needed to be much more diligent. I don't know what happens with Mark Zuckerberg at the end of the day in terms of him running the company. He's the founder. He's got voting control. He's not going to give up easily. But certainly we need to see some fundamental change because they are very much a media company. And now people recognize that. As far as those losses that you mentioned, $800 billion since August, I think we also need to keep it in context. Look at the prior 3 years. Sandra, these stocks are huge. Okay, so they ran up to levels that people thought were unsustainable. That's one of the reasons you saw so much profit taking.
Very interesting. Finally, the president tweeting this on oil this morning. We've been watching that sell-off there. Oil prices getting lower, writes the president. Great, like a big tax cut for America and the world. Enjoy. $54 was just $82. Thank you to Saudi Arabia, but let's go lower. This is translating to lower gasoline prices. Just saw on FBN that over 40 days of dropping prices when it comes to gasoline prices for the American consumer. What's happening here?
That's right. That's a big deal because, look, we've got 54 million people traveling for the Thanksgiving holiday, right? They're going to be thankful that actually they have gas prices where they are. And President Trump, people don't give him credit for this. President Trump engineered prices to go lower recently. Remember how he was, prodding the Saudis, pump more, prodding OPEC. Prices should be lower. Guess what happened? Prices are lower, and they have been dropping. Whether or not it stays there has more to do with economic growth than anything else, I think.
Pat on the back to the American oil production as well, all-time highs.
Absolutely.
That's also bringing prices down. Maria Bartiromo, thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you. John?
A race that has been too close to call finally comes to an end in Utah. The favorite Republican incumbent, Mia Love.
There are 3 breaking stories on our watch. The president actually did want his Justice Department to go after Clinton and Comey. It wasn't just rally
700 votes. The result coming a full 2 weeks after Election Day. Love finished about 20 votes short of being able to request a recount.
Well, after considering a challenge to Nancy Pelosi for the speakership, Congresswoman Marcia Fudge is now endorsing the longtime Democratic leader. Pelosi says she will name the Ohio Democrat as the chairwoman of a subcommittee on elections. That, of course, hinges on her taking back the gavel. The decision's a setback for more than a dozen Democrats who are pushing for a different speaker. The party meets next week to vote on leadership positions.
Meantime, with the midterm elections now in the rearview mirror, the Democratic field for 2020 is starting to take shape. Peter Ducey has the latest from Washington. So, outsider candidates, Peter, they're trying to position themselves for a possible run for the presidency?
They are, by spending a lot of money, John. Tom Steyer is about to start hosting town hall meetings across the country. The first one in 2 weeks in South Carolina. Steyer is the progressive billionaire behind Next Gen America and has previously campaigned to impeach President Trump. But now he's got a six-figure ad buy promoting a new platform focused more on the environment and education. Another famous billionaire, Michael Bloomberg, has recently been spending millions of his own to help others win, more than $100 million in the midterms alone. He also just pledged to donate $1.8 billion to Johns Hopkins. The former mayor is a former Republican and independent, and now he's a registered Democrat, and that is important because the DNC has new rules. You have to be a Democrat to run as a Democrat. That is a rule that independent Bernie Sanders bent in 2016. John.
So what about people who are actually in office? Is there anybody who might be interested in being president?
Yeah, well, as we saw, Senators Cory Booker and Kamala Harris spent the days before the midterms campaigning for down-ballot Democrats in places like Iowa. Elizabeth Warren is hiring experienced campaign staff, and now a red state Democrat who just won very easily is thinking about a bigger office. That is Ohio's Senator Sherrod Brown, who said this on Sunday. Connie and I are still thinking about this. This was and is an intensely personal decision with my wife and my children. My grandchildren don't know enough to know what it means, but it would change their lives, and I need to be aware of all that as I make this decision. Democratic Congressman John Delaney was the first to announce, but Congressman Beto O'Rourke has a better name ID than just about anybody right now.
Yeah, I haven't made any decisions about anything. It's probably the best way for me to put it. I think everything's too fresh still for me.
And don't forget, former advisors to Hillary Clinton are still sending mixed signals about whether or not she wants to jump in. John.
Oh, wouldn't that be a race? All right. Keep us updated. Peter Ducey, thank you.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo backing up the president on Saudi Arabia.
This is a long, historic commitment and one that is absolutely vital to America's national security. We are determined to ensure that we continue to make sure that we take care of the American people in all of the strategic decisions we make.
Why President Trump says he will not further punish the kingdom for Khashoggi's killing. In our live report next. Plus, there's this. Digit gain a couple minutes into trading. The Dow up 150 points out of the open here. After that big sell-off yesterday where we saw the Dow fall more than 550 points, that also brought the Dow and the S&P, John, into negative territory for the year. Doesn't mean that's where things will finish up, but at least for now, Dow and S&P are in the red for the year.
So, yeah, well, a bit of a Thanksgiving rally underway today, though.
We'll see. Yeah, so right now just below 25,000, up 155 points. It's been those technology names that we just talked about with Maria Bartiromo that have most recently led to the market sell-off. Also concerns about some of those energy names as oil prices come down. Some of those energy producers have taken a hit, but right now things in the green and looking up.
All right, thanks.
Meanwhile, more reaction from around the world to President Trump's decision not to punish the Saudi crown prince after more gruesome details of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Here at home, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is backing the president's position.
Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. They did not make that assessment. It's about make America great again. It's about America first. We're going to stay with Saudi Arabia.
The United States will continue to have a relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They're important partner of ours. This is a long, historic commitment and one that is absolutely vital to America's national security.
Benjamin Hall is live from our London bureau with more on that. Benjamin.
Hi, John. President Trump's statement was intended to be the final word on this, and he laid out, as you heard there, very clearly why, that national security should come before anything else. But there has been a backlash, both in the U.S. as well as abroad. Now, when the statement was released, the Turkish foreign minister was in fact in Washington, and he met soon after that release with Secretary Pompeo. He said that the killing of Khashoggi should not be covered up for the sake of maintaining trade ties with Saudi Arabia.
This is a humanitarian issue. It is a murder. We cannot say our trade will increase. Let's cover it up. Let's ignore it.
Other politicians in Turkey accused the U.S. of turning a blind eye to Khashoggi's murder and dismissed comments from President Trump as comic. Turkey also said they would now push for an international investigation. There was even a response from Iran. The foreign minister there tweeting, quote, Mr. Trump bizarrely devotes the first paragraph of his shameful statement on Saudi atrocities to accuse Iran of every sort of malfeasance he can think of. Perhaps we're also responsible for the California fires. The White House has always viewed Saudi Arabia as a key partner on all Middle East issues, and many now wonder if, following this statement, Saudi Arabia will need to work ever closer with the U.S. towards issues such as Palestinian peace deals, the Yemeni ceasefire, pushing back against Iran, and always lowering oil prices. And that's what many people will be looking for from now on, whether those key issues, and remember, we expect to see President Trump's Israeli-Palestinian peace deal very shortly, whether we'll see more movement on those in light of this statement, whether or not we may see Saudi Arabia working ever closer with the U.S. in the months or years to come. John?
Benjamin Hall, live in London. Thank you.
Now back to our top story this morning. President Trump's legal team renewing calls to end special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation after they say the president submitted his written answers to Mueller's questions. In a statement, Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani writes, quote, the special counsel has been provided with more than 30 witnesses, 1.4 million pages of material, and now the president's written responses to questions. It is time to bring this inquiry to a conclusion. Andrew McCarthy is a former assistant U.S. attorney and a Fox News contributor. Andy, good morning to you, and thanks for coming on this morning. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Sandra.
Yeah, good morning. Let me first start by asking you, so what does this mean now? The president reluctantly, I don't even know if it's fair to use that word, but we've been waiting to see what was going to come of this for quite some time, it's fair to say. And the president has now turned in these questions, saying he's answered the questions to this witch hunt. What happens now?
Well, I think it is fair to say it's reluctant. I mean, if it wasn't, then it would have happened a long time ago. This was the product of a lot of negotiation. And what I think, Sandra, is that it's actually only round one, even though everyone is in the president's camp seems to be trying to act like this is a done deal and over. What they did here was bifurcate the two aspects of Mueller's investigation, collusion and obstruction. Evidently, what the president did was answer the questions about collusion, and that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Collusion is the subject on which he was told multiple times that he was never a suspect, even when Director Comey was still at the FBI. So I don't think they've ever been too terribly worried factually about the collusion with Russia end of the investigation. Obstruction is really the thing that brought Mueller into the case. Remember, Comey was fired on May 9th of 2017. It was about a week later that in that whole uproar that Mueller was appointed. And there's profound legal issues about whether the president can be cited for obstruction by doing things that are his constitutional prerogatives as president, whether a federal prosecutor ought to be inquiring into his motive as long as what he did was legal. There's a lot of real profound legal issues about that.
Interesting. So what sense are you getting then, Andy, that this Mueller probe, this Russia investigation, is going to wrap anytime soon?
I think it is winding down, Sandra, because, the president's answering of these questions doesn't happen in a vacuum. The other things we see are, for example, Special Counsel Mueller is evidently going to allow General Flynn to be sentenced. It looks like Manafort is heading towards sentencing. I can tell you as an experienced former prosecutor that if you're intending to bring another big case and you think you have these witnesses who would be cooperating witnesses in that case, you don't let them get sentenced. You have them testify first, and then they get sentenced down the road. So just the fact that, we have indictments that are brought that seem to preclude the possibility of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin, he's letting the witnesses or the potential witnesses get sentenced. That sure signals like things are winding down.
Meanwhile, I want to transition to what is next when it comes to Ivanka Trump's email and her use of private email to conduct official business. Now, House Democrats, the House Oversight Committee, is going to look into her use of her private email to conduct official government business. And this is according to now the panel's senior Democrat. The president, on his way to Mar-a-Lago as he was departing the White House yesterday, weighed in, had this to say about all of it.
They weren't classified like Hillary Clinton. They weren't deleted like Hillary Clinton. They're all in presidential records. There was no hiding. There was no deleting like Hillary Clinton did. There was no service in the basement like Hillary Clinton.
Is there any indication that Ivanka Trump violated guidelines for, government use of private email?
Well, we'll have to see how extensive it is. You know, I think the president is right to draw all those distinctions. That said, in this environment, particularly given how big an issue he made of Mrs. Clinton's use of private email to conduct official business, you have to wonder why anybody would do that. It's kind of an explosive thing at this point. But, you know, that said, if it's occasional use and they make sure that they, you know, number one, it's not classified or sensitive, and they make sure they keep a copy of the correspondence in the government's file, it's not really a big thing legally. I imagine that politically it'll make for a few uncomfortable moments.
Yeah, and as far as Ivanka Trump and her spokesperson for her attorney, they have pushed back on this, saying that that the emails have been retained in conformity with records preservation laws and rules, and that the private email account was almost always used for logistics and scheduling concerning her family. So we will watch this and see where it all goes. Andy McCarthy, thank you for coming on this morning. Happy Thanksgiving. Good holiday to you.
Thanks, Sandra. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
California expecting to get hit now with heavy rain, and while it's welcomed, it's causing new danger for the survivors of those devastating wildfires in that state. We'll talk with a firefighter on the front line. Plus, did you catch this?
We are still confused, shrouded with hate, anger, racism, mommy issues.